Well, another conversation with John Butler here in the very peaceful, I have to say, Quaker Meeting House in Bakewell. As you know, I've just returned from completing my Camino, the Camino to Santiago in northern Spain. But I have walked, it says 779 kilometres. I've struggled to get back to what you might call normal. And I think you're familiar with this feeling of being sort of out of sorts, shall we say, in the busyness and well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Can you recall what it was like for you coming back from, say, the Namib or a desert place back to civilization and how you adapted? You might be able to help me in my adapting back to normal life.
I don't know that I've got a way of helping adapt. It just is as you describe. I think if my father had realized when I was 20 the effects of sending me off around the world to be what I wanted to be, then a cowboy in Australia, he probably would have thought twice about it, because after nearly a year's immersion in the wide open spaces of Australia and the wonder of a long sea voyage out there and back again, it was indeed, having been stretched, it was very hard to come back. In fact, I don't think I ever have come back to what you might call conventional life. No, I don't think I ever have. And subsequent journeys, and then when I was 26, the greatest journey of all, the journey of meditation into spirit, has continued ever since in drawing me out of this world and having to face the dilemma of how to reintegrate with the world that I felt I'd left behind. How to serve the world, that's a better word, how to serve and just what was valid, what could I do, what was my role in this life that where I didn't really feel I belonged any longer, but where I obviously had to live in, but not of, the world.
Well, that is the classic verse that applies. What are the possible meanings of that verse we are, I think, most of us familiar with, being in the world but not of it?
Well, of course, when we first hear this, which may be when we're quite young, it may bring us it's an idea more than a reality, isn't it? And it may bring us some comfort. For most of our life, it will remain more of an intellectual idea than an actual reality. And as it becomes ever more real, we will discover that reality isn't a sort of a place with a fixed beginning and end. It is infinite. So there's no end to the meaning that will unfold about it, to be in the world and yet not of it. So don't think that I can give you a precise answer. It is a journey without end.
Well, as I say, I've just come back from ending my particular journey to Santiago, the Camino, and as I say, struggling to get back to normal. But there are two normals I want to explore with you in this conversation. I'll call the first one human normal, and by that I mean it seemed obvious to me when I got back to the noise and bustle and moving tiny house, or the practicalities of this life. But more than that, I struggled. I avoided listening, for example, to the news, and until yesterday, in fact, newspapers, because it seemed obvious to me, John, there are just layers of conditioning and information and social media, of course, that we're mostly all of us immersed in, which in an almost terrifying way, if I can put it that strongly, dictates the agenda of how we live, the whole of our society. And this was a real wake-up call to me, that how has it come to this situation where, putting it bluntly, we are nothing more than puppets, or in a sleepwalk, dancing to somebody else's tune. And by that I mean the social norms, I mean the conditioning, I mean the whole emphasis of for example, maybe specifically economic growth being the god that the politicians worship. And there are many, shall we say, aspects and dimensions of what we consider normal life. And I just want to say no. No. It's a choice. We don't have to live. We don't have to dance to the beat of these drums set by others. So this is, I'll call this the human response to conditioning. And of course, one of your well-known sayings is, "Don't fence me in." So I'd be interested in you sharing your response to society's normal.
Again, there are so many stages of this. Certainly this reaction that you describe is familiar to me. I was 26 when I learnt to meditate, which immediately opened up to me a higher dimension. I had to go down to London to attend a school. That's where I learnt, in London. I had a farm up here in the north of England. It was quite a long train journey. I had to go down to London and come back again to continue looking after my farm, which was expensive and tedious, but I did it. And I used to describe this, to anyone who would listen, as my weekly descent into hell. That's how I thought about it in those days. But at the school, they gave us the exercise of just looking and listening without commentary. And so gradually, on railway stations or whenever I remembered in the street, I'd stand still, I'd just listen, and I'd look. And I began to realize that, it's amazing, that in the middle of this, as you describe, there is this perfect stillness, perfect peace. However mad the world was, it's contained in this eternal peace or rest. There are two aspects of life. And it's almost, I wouldn't say, but the tension of the world, this sort of hatred almost of the world, it settled down because I was no longer, at least I had a way of rising above it. Of course, I was only learning. I just had momentary glimpses. Now it's become, second nature to me. But for many years, it is a long, long growing process to let go one's worldly attachments and conditioning, and realize this higher dimension of life, where there is no conditioning, and where the wide open spaces of life that I'd always longed for as a young man are actually found, always in the here and now, totally available. And from there, the question arose, how can I best serve the world? How can I help? What is the real help? It's easy enough to condemn the world, write it off. I don't want this, but what use is that? Let me suit you, suit what I was also beginning to realize is the ego, John. John can very easily go away and sit on a mountain and say, to hell with the world, I don't want it. But what use is that to anybody else? So the question of service arose. What can I do? Well, many, many years later, well, not so many, because not so many, correct me. I remember the very first, or very, very soon, my first days of meditation, saying to myself, well, this is prayer. This is exactly what prayer is. Prayer is from the world realizing this infinite all-rightness, which is spirit. In this, there's none of these worldly problems. It's totally free. The aches and pains of this life continue, but here, there are none of them. There's no age here. And later on I began to realize there's no death here. Death is a reality down here, but without moving an inch from your situation, but simply opening up a higher dimension, you're in this realm of no death, of eternal life. The two are coexistent. So, that is gradually, through many, many years, has been developing all my life. But of course it started in a way as you describe, a young man coming back from a year in Australia and difficulty of fitting in.
Which brings me on to the sort of second dimension of this question of what is normal, or what is real, which actually, if you're a philosopher, is called the ontological question. What are we talking about? What is reality? Well, I remember 5:30 in the morning, sitting cross-legged in a meeting hall in Shantivanam ashram, Benedictine ashram in India by the river Kaveri, doing Benedictine morning prayers with the monks and visitors like me, a couple of visitors like me anyway at that time, and part of it was in Sanskrit and part of it was in English, which was a joy to me, to my ears. And I remember one phrase, in English bit of course, my Sanskrit's non-existent. The phrase is from the unreal to the real. Well, honestly, I had no idea then, possibly not now, what we're talking about. But this is an expression that you use often, actually, over many videos from time to time. So what do you mean by from the unreal to the real?
Well, before I dive into that one, Phil, let me go and add something to my previous answer, because pilgrimage, such as you describe, is a very, very ancient practice. People in various stages of worldly discomfort, sick people, were recommended to go on pilgrimage. Before medicine as developed as it is now, and when people's focus was more on salvation of their souls rather than, I won't say salvation of the body, but procrastination of the day of death, saving you today to die or something else tomorrow, which is a very limited goal, really. People will recommend go on pilgrimage. Why? For exactly that reason, wasn't it, that you describe. To give you a glimpse and experience of another reality. I mean, anybody knows you go on holiday. Everybody knows the holiday does you good. It usually takes a few days to settle down, but after you've been there a week, it's the second week of holiday that's when you begin to reach a sort of level of what you might call normality, you just forget these habitual burdens, this conditioning that we carry around with us like a tortoise carries its shell, and begin to actually look around and see the sea and feel the sand between your toes and all the other lovely things that people go on holiday for. So, from the real to the real, well, what do we mean by it? That's a very good example, isn't it? And then, as I tried to explain, where is the end of the journey? Where is the end of it? What do we mean by real, anyway? It's one of these words that's floating around, but what do we mean by it? Can anybody actually define it, or is it indefinable? Like freedom or peace. We can't describe them. We know what we're talking about, but you can't actually box it into a formulation of words, can you? We can try to describe it, but that's just a description. Any fool can describe things, but see, things of the spirit are unlimited, and words are limited. If we use words, if we use words to describe something, then it's not something else, is it? We're in the world of duality. But reality, real reality, perhaps you could say, is well, perhaps you could say that from the real to the real might be a way of, you could describe it as from duality to non-duality, or from division, from separation to non-separation. Well, that often happens when we travel or go on pilgrimage, doesn't it? You start off very boxed in with me and my little world, my problems, and then you go abroad and you begin to look around you and discover something that isn't so limited. Meet other people, find other interests.
Or in my case, you fall over in the snow and sprain your ankle. That's it. I like the expression. I don't know where it's from. It's not a biblical expression, and I don't know who to attribute it to, but it goes something like this. I'll paraphrase. We are not humans having an occasional divine insight or experience. We are divine having a human experience. And to me, this promises, shall we say, outrageously the possibility of a shift of understanding, realization, shall we call it, from the unreal to the real. Is that going too far?
Oh, no, not at all. I suppose as far as a formulation of words can go, it sounds correct. But what a world of difference, isn't there, between picking up a phrase like that from a book, maybe, or hearing it from somebody else, and realizing it. There's a whole vast industry, I suppose, really, of everything from churches to internet gurus and spiritual books, spiritual videos. God, such a proliferation of people swapping ideas and good words around. How many people actually realize it in actuality? When I was learning to meditate, there was a phrase then, a realized man, which people sort of spoke of with bated breath. A realized man. I couldn't understand what they were talking about at all. I've never really liked the phrase myself. Perhaps now, at the end of my life, I don't think really through much effort of my own, or even any effort, but just the mere fact of approaching death, it doesn't half focus the mind on the fact that almost everything that up to now I've considered myself, John Butler, is dying out. So what's left? I suppose this really is a realization that all these words are actually there's something in them all. Well, at least some of them. A phrase like as you describe becomes more real. Part of that phrase, a realized man, was a fully realized man. I may have a glimmering of what a realized man is. I'm very not at all sure about the fullness of it. I suspect it's infinite, but I wouldn't like to say.
Well, I think you prefer to say, you don't often use the word realized or self-realized. You certainly don't use the word enlightened. You prefer Mr. Nothing.
Yes, I like that. Yes, I do. Yes.
What is it about Mr. Nothing that sort of chimes?
Again, it's such a long, slow, gradual process. 2 steps forward, 1 back, all the way. I suppose it's pretty much a gradual, very, very gradual disenchantment with what we call myself. I suppose hearing the silly things that I say, learning to distrust my own tongue, gradually trying to understand what's meant by the ego and all these various self-labels, self-development, self-reliance, self-rights, all these sort of things. And seeing it in the context of this higher reality. It's the constant daily practice of meditation constantly reminding me that there is this higher reality other than John Butler, this human performance. Yes, countless insights and sort of mini realizations of these two realities, the world and not of this world.
And Mr. Nothing in between.
Well, in this higher reality, you realize that nothing is actually everything. But it's everything. You see, in this world, everything has a limit, and it dies. That's a very good definition of reality. Does it die? Now, what in this world does not die? I have learned that in spiritual work, spiritual development, we do progress more by elimination than by acquiring anything fresh. We grow out of previous conditioning, just as a child grows up. You could say that here now I am growing out of mortality. If you ask me what I'm growing into, see, this is where it gets tricky, because you can't, it's beyond words, you see. Words are children of this world. You can describe things in this world. The higher world you can't describe. You can't describe God or spirit. Which I can tell you by the smile on my face that it's real. We say bye-bye to death, which is this world, and welcome. They talk of the world to come, don't they? That's quite a good phrase. The next world.
It's a different kind of knowing, isn't it?
They say know by faith, yes.
At the end of my walk to Santiago on the Camino, many people go on to a place called Finisterre, Land's End, and there's a ritual where some people throw their boots into the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. I wasn't going to do that. And some people burn them, and some people burn their something else. Instead, I went on a train to Porto in Portugal. I'd heard good reports from several people, and I absolutely loved Porto. So having said I struggled to get back to normal here, I absolutely loved life and port in Porto. And one of the delightful things, John, was there's a library. No, it's not a library. It's a bookshop. But to get in this bookshop, you actually have to book online, and it costs €8. I didn't actually buy a ticket. But outside there are long queues. I thought, how wonderful that books are so highly valued in Porto. And then I spoke to somebody, and the reason is because in this bookshop, which is from the early 20th century, there's a very grand red staircase. It's world famous, apparently. I didn't know. And it features in the Harry Potter books at Hogwarts, or the idea of it does, because J.K. Rowling lived for a couple of years in Porto, just round the corner, and it's said to be inspired the Red Staircase in Hogwarts. And at the end of the queue, strategically placed, was a man in a pork pie hat and a woolen type coat, sitting on a fold-up chair with an organ, a hurdy-gurdy organ, powered by punched cards, playing tunes, and he had a perch with different birds on it, and I was completely enchanted by this, and I watched, and I just looked at this man and in his eyes, and he knew, and he had some sayings on his suitcase and on a red vinyl record, which indicated he knew. And I didn't want to ask him any sort of obvious questions, but I did ask him. I said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I'm from nowhere." And I just smiled, and I just thought of you. So I'd come across Mr. Nowhere in Porto, and I was going back to Mr. Nothing in Bakewell.
Yes, yes, yes. If you ask me where I'm going when I die, guess what? How I'll answer?
Nowhere.
Nowhere. How can Jesus say, just before he dies, "I am with you always"? Millions and millions of people in all parts of the world have heard that and thought, yes, that's right. Talk about the nothing being everything and the nowhere being everywhere. It all begins to make sense, doesn't it? Become more real. And isn't it marvellous how any little, just like that, a little glimmer of reality, of something more real, immediately without any effort at all, just puts into place the less realized, what you would call the less real. I don't really like, I've never used these words like the world's illusion or something. It's too simple. But in actual life experience, just many, many little indications like that, we gradually grow out of one level of life and grow into another. I think this is the more to be relied on, way I like to approach it. I'm a bit suspicious of quick fixes.
For all our words and labels and concepts about real or unreal, we're just sitting here in the quiet of this Quaker room, ticking of the clock. The wind's quite strong outside at the moment. There was hail earlier.
Yes, Phil, you pick up two things that I had in mind then. As spiritual comforts, I know nothing better really than the tick-tock of a clock, the sense that life goes on, and just the weather. It's a late spring, it's frustrating for those who want to get their seeds in the ground, but what can we do? Sooner or later, God willing, the sun will come out. It always has, hasn't it? After the flood, in the story in the Bible, after the flood, the story of Noah's Ark, after people got very naughty in the early days, and so God flooded the earth, so the story goes. And there was one good man who, with all the animals, was saved. And afterwards, God put a rainbow in the sky, didn't he, as his promise that he wouldn't do it again, and said that, how does it go? Seed time and harvest will never cease. I love that.
Well, speaking as a farmer, that's very close to your heart. What's the farmers saying about the weather, John?
If you don't like the weather, wait a bit. Yes. Patience isn't much in fashion as a word these days, is it? But it's a very good old-fashioned word, patience. It used to be quite a common name for girls. How long? Have you ever met a girl called Patience? Don't think I have.
I remember when I was a boy, in our bathroom at home, we had a plaque or a poster on the wall. It was a poem by Patience Strong. Please remember, don't forget, never leave the bathroom wet, nor leave the soap still in the water. That's a thing one never oughter. Or leave the towels about the floor, or keep the bath an hour or more when other folks are wanting one. Please remember, don't forget.
That's sweet. Patience Strong, bless her. Yes. Yes.
You and I have also had a conversation in the past, John. I remember on the website, the Spiritual Unfoldment website, there's a section on the objects of the charity, which governs the activity of the trust, and one of them is to discriminate between the natural and unnatural. And we've talked about this before, but I just wanted to ask you again what exactly which tree you're barking up here, the discriminating between the natural and the unnatural.
Yes, that's very, very appropriate to bring that up, Phil. Yes, thank you. Well, actually, nothing could better fit in with our previous words about reality, you see, from real to unreal, and from many gradations of unreality to more and more real reality, fuller realization. Because although we talk about this sort of nature that we can see out of the window as natural, if you think more deeply about it, why does it die then? Is death natural? What about nature red in tooth and claw? Think how all these beautiful animals that we all love so much, They are in a perpetual cycle of kill and be killed, eat and be eaten. Is that really the natural world? What about the great discovery, as I've mentioned, that when we get old, it opens up this higher reality where there is no death. So is nature really as natural as we think it is? Or is there a higher, perhaps a supernatural world, and which is more natural? And certainly, like your first description at the start of this conversation, Phil, one way you can describe the world we live in is as a very unnatural world, isn't it? I mean, almost everybody has a gut reaction that there's something wrong with it. It's unnatural to live like this. So, how did I put it in the object? To discriminate between the natural and the unnatural. Well, you see, if you just think carefully about those words, it describes exactly what the work is from the transient world of mortality to the ever higher reality. And, you know, I've had enough experience of this now to realize that that is natural. That's the real nature, because I assure you it isn't empty. In fact, I even am brave enough these days to connect it with the word paradise, heaven, the heavenly realms, where not only you and me have hope of immortality, but what about the animals? In fact, for the Bible-minded amongst us, there's a beautiful description in the book of Isaiah about the kingdom of God, where he describes the lion lying down with the calf and the wolf with the lamb. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of God as the waters cover the sea. And didn't that pull my heart as a little boy when I first heard those words as a child at school? I suppose that's why I've lived my life as I have, in search of that, in ever fuller realization of its reality.